Every year in March, thousands of delegates in dark, identical suits gather at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing. Under the gaze of the world's cameras, they listen to long speeches before passing new laws with choreographed shows of hands or the synchronized press of buttons. At first glance, this image projects the soul of a massive parliament and a modern legislative system. But in reality, what unfolds within the Great Hall is nothing more than a magnificent political theater, an expensive backdrop designed to grant legitimacy to decisions made months earlier in the dark rooms of power. The National People's Congress, the State Council, and the ministers themselves possess no real independent authority. To comprehend the architecture of power in the People's Republic of China, one must discard every Western concept of government, separation of powers, or civil institutions. In this system, there is an unwritten iron law. The country does not belong to the state. In China, the state, the military, and the economy are all subordinate to and owned by the Communist Party. The structure of power in China is a complex, nested matrix of 98 million members. An army of bureaucrats who, in the end, place the fate of 1.4 billion people and the world's second-largest economy into the hands of just a few powerful men, hidden behind the closed doors of the Zhongnanhai compound, the secret headquarters of the regime in Beijing. But how exactly does this flawless and formidable pyramid function? To understand the mechanics of China, one must master the dual-track system of party and state. Across China, from the smallest remote villages to the ministries of the capital, two parallel structures move in sync: the state institutions and the party institutions. The state bodies handle the executive, day-to-day administration, but the party bodies set the policy and make the final calls. In reality, for every government official, there is a party counterpart, a parallel authority, who acts as the true boss. Take, for example, a Chinese province. It is managed by a governor. The governor oversees the economy, the budget, and the infrastructure. But he is not the most powerful man in the province. Above him sits a figure known as the Provincial Communist Party Secretary. The party secretary is the undisputed ruler. He dictates the grand strategy and the security lines. The governor is merely the operative tasked with executing those orders. This dual structure penetrates everything: universities, hospitals, and even massive private corporations. The president of a university has little real power. It is the university party secretary who has the final word. This dual system reaches its absolute apex at the very top of the nation. In global political discourse and international media, Xi Jinping is known as the President of China. But within this intricate structure, the title of President is his least significant and most ceremonial role. In the Chinese Constitution, the presidency is largely a diplomatic front, a title reserved for state visits and representing the nation on the world stage. On its own, it carries very little executive power. The absolute, undisputed power of Xi Jinping flows not from the presidency, but from his primary position: General Secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. In this system, the state is merely the executive arm of the party. It is the General Secretary who acts as the emperor without a crown, charting the course of the Red Dragon. But reaching this summit requires surviving a ruthless filter, climbing the steps of a high-stakes political pyramid. To understand this structure, we must look at the party pyramid from the base up. At the foundation are roughly 98 million ordinary members. Membership in the Chinese Communist Party is by no means easy. This is the club of the elite. Only the top students, the most successful entrepreneurs, model workers, and distinguished figures, after passing through rigorous ideological filters, are granted entry. For a Chinese citizen, a party card is the golden ticket to the upper class, a gateway to elite economic and political opportunities. But out of these 98 million, only a tiny fraction ever enter the corridors of true power. The next critical step is the Central Committee, a group of about 370 of the nation's top-tier elite, including high-ranking generals, CEOs of massive state-owned corporations, and provincial governors. They meet behind closed doors, usually once a year, to ratify the grand policies of the nation. As we move toward the peak, the circle of power tightens significantly. Above the Central Committee sits the Politburo. This body consists of 24 of the most powerful men and a rare few women in China, managing the key megacities, vital provinces, and sensitive ministries. But the final, world-altering decisions are not even made in the Politburo. At the very tip of this pyramid sits the Politburo Standing Committee. This is where the political gods of China reside, usually composed of just 7 men. These 7, dressed in identical dark suits with hair dyed perfectly black, represent the core of power in China. Inside the secure rooms of the Zhongnan High Compound, away from every lens and microphone, they decide on trillion-dollar budgets, military shifts, and global strategies. And at the summit, presiding over these 7, is the General Secretary, the man who controls the entire network and balances the weight between various internal factions. But in a system of 98 million, who decides which mayor becomes a governor? Who chooses who ascends to the peak of the pyramid? The answer lies in one of the most secretive and powerful institutions on Earth, the Central Organization Department. This department is, in effect, the most powerful and secretive personnel agency on Earth. This shadow agency has no sign on its headquarters in Beijing. Its phone number is not listed in any directory, yet it holds the personnel files, the weaknesses, the strengths, and the intimate details of tens of thousands of Chinese officials. The Organization Department is the ultimate arbiter. It appoints every governor, every minister, every university president, every newspaper editor, and even the CEOs of massive state-owned banks and oil companies. In China, being a politician is like managing a mega-corporation. Advancement within the party is governed by a rigid system of key performance indicators, KPIs. If a local official can generate staggering economic growth, attract foreign investment, and, most importantly, suppress any public protest instantly, the Organization Department moves them to the next step of the pyramid. But one mistake, one scandal, and their file is permanently archived. Their career is dead. Despite its appearance of monolithic unity, the Chinese Communist Party has never been a single cohesive bloc. Behind the curtain of identical suits and synchronized applause, the party is a landscape of fierce internal rivalries. For decades, the fate of China was decided by the balance of power between 2 dominant factions. First, the Shanghai Gang, an alliance of coastal elites and bankers focused on breakneck capitalism and global trade. Second, the Communist Youth League faction, bureaucrats rising from the impoverished rural interior, focused on closing the wealth gap and managing the domestic machine. In the past, the cockpit of China, that 7-man standing committee, was always a careful mix of these rivals. Decisions weren't just dictated, they were negotiated, debated, and balanced so that no single group could seize absolute control. But there is a force far greater than committees and bureaucrats. What ensures this massive pyramid never collapses under the weight of its own inequality? The answer is forged in steel and gunpowder. One of the greatest global misunderstandings about China is the nature of its armed forces. In most nations, the military belongs to the country, sworn to defend the Constitution and the borders. But in China, the reality is fundamentally different. The People's Liberation Army, PLA, with over 2 million soldiers, is the world's largest military. But the PLA does not belong to the nation of China. The PLA is the armed wing and the private guard of the Communist Party. Its primary legal duty is not to defend the soil, but to ensure the survival of the party against all threats, foreign and, most importantly, domestic. This founding principle is rooted in the doctrine of Mao Zedong. In one historic sentence, Mao mapped the DNA of the Chinese state. Political power grows out of the barrel of a gun, but the party must always control the gun, and the gun must never be allowed to control the party. This is why, in the Chinese power structure, there exists a body known as the Central Military Commission, CMC. This commission commands every soldier, every warship, every aircraft, and the entire nuclear arsenal of the nation. The chairman of this commission is the true commander-in-chief. To understand why this military title is more powerful than the state or even the party, we only need to look at history. Deng Xiaoping, the architect of modern China in the 1980s, was the undisputed leader of the country. But curiously, he was never the president of China, nor was he the general secretary of the party. His absolute, unchallenged power came from one single title. He was the chairman of the Central Military Commission. He knew that whoever controls the gun controls the nation. Even in transition, the military remains the ultimate anchor. In 2002, when Jiang Zemin retired as general secretary and president, he did not surrender his military post. He held on to the command of the army for 2 more years, until 2004, to maintain his status as a shadow power over the new president, Hu Jintao. The leader of China today, Xi Jinping, has ensured that these titles are never separated again. Along with his ceremonial presidency and his powerful general secretaryship, he holds the chairmanship of the Central Military Commission with an iron fist. The party knows one simple truth. As long as it commands the absolute loyalty of the generals, no force on earth can topple the pyramid of power. For decades, the system seemed stable. After the death of the dictator Mao Zedong, the leadership of China realized that giving absolute power to a single individual was a recipe for national catastrophe. To prevent another Mao, they established the system of collective leadership and wrote a 2-term limit, a maximum of 10 years, into the Constitution. This rotational system worked with clockwork precision for 30 years. Leaders arrived, ruled for a decade, and then quietly handed the keys to their successors. Until 2012. The man who took the stage that year was destined to shatter every rule of the game: Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping possessed a profound understanding of the power pyramid. He launched a quiet yet ruthless project to seize total control of the state. His primary weapon for this soft coup was the anti-corruption campaign. Under the guise of purifying the party, he arrested and imprisoned tens of thousands of political rivals, military generals, and influential figures who stood in his path. But his most brilliant move was the systematic weakening of the number 2 man, the premier. Historically, the day-to-day management of the economy and the state was the domain of the State Council and the premier. The premier was the direct master of the economy. But Xi Jinping employed a clever, unprecedented structural trick. He established dozens of new bodies called central leading groups. These shadow committees took over policymaking in economy, cybersecurity, foreign policy, and reform. And the masterstroke? Xi Jinping personally appointed himself as the chairman of nearly every single one of these shadow committees. With this strategy, the ministries and the premier were effectively cut out of the decision-making loop. They were reduced to mere executors of orders passed down from committees commanded by Xi himself. Once he was certain that every rival in the Central Committee and the Politburo had been erased, he fired the final shot at the collective leadership system. In 2018, in a move that shocked the global diplomatic corps, he removed the two-term limit from the Chinese constitution. Simultaneously, his personal political philosophy, Xi Jinping thought, was officially enshrined in the constitution, an honor previously granted only to Mao Zedong. The final display of this absolute dominance occurred in 2022, before the world's cameras. During the 20th Party Congress, Hu Jintao, the former president of China, was sitting next to Xi Jinping when he was suddenly and forcibly lifted from his seat by security officers and escorted out of the hall. That humiliating image was Xi's definitive message to the world. The era of collective leadership is dead. The new emperor has ascended. This concentration of power is a double-edged sword for China. On one hand, this unified system allows Beijing to execute massive infrastructure projects in months and drive the economy with unmatched speed, actions that would take years of slow bureaucracy in Western democracies. But on the other hand, this structure has made the Red Dragon dangerously fragile. When all power, media, economy, and military are concentrated in the hands of one man, the system falls victim to a lethal disease known as the echo chamber. In today's China, few in the Politburo dare to bring bad news, real economic data, or management failures to Xi Jinping's ears. It is a government of yes men. Furthermore, by abolishing the 10-year limit, Xi has created the greatest political crisis of China's future, the succession crisis. Currently, there is no legal or transparent mechanism for the transfer of power after Xi Jinping. He has designated no successor. The question that haunts not just Beijing, but the entire world is this. In a system that has no plan for the day after its leader, what will happen to the world's second-largest economy when the summit of the pyramid eventually vanishes? Will a war for power shatter the Red Dragon from within? What is your perspective on the structure of power in China? Do you believe this unified authoritarian system will ultimately prove more successful than Western democracies? Or is it destined for an internal collapse? Every story has two sides, and the truth usually lies somewhere in the shadows. We want to hear your perspective. Join the discussion in the comments below. If this profile gave you a new perspective, support our mission with a like and share. Thank you for being part of the Profile community. Until next time, stay curious.